Good evening. Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And I'm saying evening because we are in the United States, although our guest of honor is in Australia and it's morning for her. But welcome everybody to Book Passage, to another Book Passage event. I'm your host, Paula Farmer, and I hope everybody is having a really good summer, a safe summer, continuing to be safe so we can kind of eventually move into in-person events along with continuing our special online events like this one today. And I read our featured author, Charlotte McConaghy's debut novel, Migrations, last year, just as we were going into the shutdown, which was like in March. And something about it, I know for an author, it may not have been the best timing because you want to get out on the road and promote your books. But for those of us that were reading it, it felt perfectly timed. There was something very quiet and comfortable about it. And it was kind of just perfect as the world was getting quiet and kind of internalizing. It also, a few months later, when we started to open up, was selected for the Book Passage First Edition Club. And we're so honored. Just our customers, our club members, our sales team, everybody just gravitated to this and loved being able to recommend it. And we continue to do so because it is in paperback. But now she has a new book, and just as wonderful, well-written and engaging as Migrations is, Once There Were Wolves is equally effective and engaging, and clearly shows that Charlotte has a passion and a current concern for nature and a commitment to strong female stories. Charlotte is an Australian author living in Sydney. She has a master's degree in screenwriting from the Australian Film, Television, and Radio School. Migration has been translated into 20 languages and has already, I guess, been adapted to a film. Kind of steering today's conversation is Nina LaCour, who joins us from San Francisco. She's an award-winning and nationally best-selling author of Watch Over Me, We Are Okay, Hold Still, and Everything Leads to You. She hosts the podcast Keeping a Notebook and teaches for Hamline University's MFA in Writing for Children's program and Young Adults program. She's also a former indie bookseller, so we love you and we appreciate both of you being here tonight. Nina, please take it away. We're looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you so much, Paula. I'm so excited to be here to talk to you tonight, Charlotte. And I had the same experience as Paula, actually, during the pandemic. At first, I had a really hard time reading, and I couldn't get into books. I was just so consumed by the news. And then I started Migrations, and it just swept me up, and I was completely immersed in it. And I had that wonderful feeling for anybody watching who's ever been in a rut and hasn't found a good book, and it's like a feeling of loss, I think, sometimes, to not be able to be transported in that way. And I still remember reading Migrations late at night in bed and just feeling like I was somewhere very, very far away. So thank you for that. And I'm just so thrilled to talk about Once There Were Wolves tonight because, as transported as I was by Migrations, I loved this one even more, which is saying a lot because Migrations is the one that I was telling everybody I knew to read. And now I feel even more so about this one. So thank you for involving me in your release, and congratulations.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for doing this. It's really such a joy to be able to chat with you, and thank you to Book Passage for hosting us. What a pleasure.
So will you start by telling us a little bit about Once There Were Wolves?
Sure. So it's the story of Inti Flynn, who is a a scientist, biologist, who's been tasked with reintroducing 14 grey wolves into the Scottish Highlands, and in order to kind of rewild the landscape there, which is suffering from climate change. And she's brought her twin sister Aggie along for the ride, who's in need of some serious healing after a kind of trauma that we can learn about later. She gets a lot of pushback from the locals because there's quite a dense farming population there. And of course, when the body shows up, she knows that her wolves are probably going to be blamed, and so she kind of makes a reckless decision to protect them. It's a love story. It's a bit of a murder mystery. It's a story about nature and sisters. I think ultimately it's kind of the story of rewilding not only landscapes but ourselves as well.
Oh, that's wonderful. That leads so well into what I wanted to start with, because I pulled out this quote from the novel that just leapt out for me. At one point, Inti says, "Some people need wildness in their life." And I thought, it was just such a wonderful statement of the theme, and like wildness is something that's so, it's scary, it's frightening in the novel, but it's also vital, and they all need it in one way or another. And so I wondered if the theme of wildness brought you to the project, or if you started in a different place and this idea of wildness being so present on the pages came to you as you worked.
Yeah, it's something that I'm very fascinated by and interested in. And I guess first started coming up for me as I wrote Migrations, because it probably wasn't something that I'd considered before that book. And then, I stoked my obsession and I kind of can't stop writing about it now. But I think for this book, I really needed to think about the idea of what wildness is and what it represents to us, and because the notion of rewilding is so important now for our planet, and that's the kind of idea of claiming back spaces that we have changed for the worst by our presence, really. So it's claiming back spaces and returning them to the way that they once were. But if we're looking at wildness in terms of ourselves, I think there's something really kind of, as you say, it's a frightening concept, but it's also a really thrilling one, because I think we all instinctively want that sense of wildness to return to our lives. And I think for me, that idea of rewilding ourselves is about finding or reclaiming a sense of balance with the rest of the natural world, which is something I think humans are not very good at. We kind of, everything else manages to exist in this beautiful balanced state, especially wolves. Wolves are such a kind of crucial part of the balance of their own environments. But we seem to have kind of lost that ability along the way. And I'm just really interested in how we find that again, and that harmony with the rest of the world. And so, yeah, that theme kind of was always pretty heavily filling the book, really.
Yeah, I felt it so much, and I felt like when I finished reading it, I felt this sense of just wanting to be out in nature and wanting to be a part of that. And I know you live in Sydney and I live in San Francisco, and in urban environments, I often feel so closed off from the wild, right, and what wildness is. Yeah, and especially during this time, I feel like this is those of us who live in cities during the pandemic, I think our lives are kind of often the opposite of wild. And that was a question that I had for you too, because I know that you did a lot of at least the revision of this novel during the pandemic, right? Like, yep. And I was just curious about how the wild what relationship you have to the wild in your own life, and was this a experience of, you know, escaping into pure fiction, or are you someone who has, you know, traveled the world and gone to these amazing remote places and spent time in the wilderness?
It's a bit of both, I think. I did go to Scotland to research this book, and that was an incredible experience. We spent the time kind of roaming around really rugged mountains and hills, and exploring the remaining patches of forest there that have kind of existed there since the Ice Age. It's such a kind of, it is such a wild place because it's really unpredictable in terms of its weather and environment. You know, it can be sort of beautiful and sunny one second and then incredibly perilous and windy and rainy the next second. So it was kind of a really intense experience in that way. And I knew instantly that it was sort of the perfect place for this book. But there's absolutely, you know, so much of my writing is longing. It's wish fulfillment. It's wishing I could be more in touch with the wilderness and closer to nature than I am, because it can feel really alienating living in a city. And I think, you know, sometimes it's bad for our psyches. So I think that's why I write myself into these kind of wild spaces and hope I can kind of carry along the readers with me.
Yeah, well, you absolutely do. So in addition to the wolves, I was struck by just how many animals are in the book, and especially in the beginning. Like, you begin with the scene of killing a rabbit for food, and then we have wolves in a cage, and then we have a horse that has escaped and that Inti needs to tame enough to take home. And it struck me that Inti gets to be a lot closer to these animals than Franny does in Migrations. And I wondered if that was, you know, a conscious choice on your part of you, because I think of Franny in Migrations as, you know, following the GPS of the birds, but they're so out of reach. Mm-hmm. And here, Inti is she's right up there, touching them sometimes. And I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about all of the animals in the book.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it was such a joy actually being able to write the animals into this novel, because it's funny. I really love animals so much, and when I was writing Migrations, it was really hard to be writing a book where they were so absent, you know, and that was kind of, I mean, that's the tragedy of the novel, that they are so absent. But I kept finding myself wanting to bring them into the scenes and then going, no, I can't, they're not there anymore. And so it was a real pleasure to have them be present in this book, and to have Inti be someone who works so closely with them. I mean, I think a lot of us have fantasies about, you know, packing up and going and being able to be closer to wildlife. And so it was really lovely that she could be this kind of amazing adventurer who got to hold baby wolves in the wild, and you know, come across deer in the forest, and you know, beautiful birds that you kind of only see out in really remote spaces. It felt right for the book.
Yeah, it does. And even the scenes with animals that involve the death of animals still have this just beautiful reverence for all of life and for the creatures. It's just, I loved reading about animals with as much care as you put into them.
Thank you. I mean, the death part is a really tricky thing, and that was actually... I struggled with that a little bit, because I don't think animal lovers naturally want to write about or read about the death of animals. And I know that a lot of it really does affect a lot of people, and they won't pick up a book because specifically there's an animal death in it. But for me, what I couldn't kind of avoid when I was doing my research was the reality that this is something that people who work with animals come across so often, and it's such a kind of important and heavy part of the work that they do. It felt really it felt almost inappropriate to kind of remove that from the narrative of wolves. The world is so dangerous for them that in fact they don't live a long life. There's so many ways for them to die, and so that just felt really kind of like a crucial part of Inti's life and the difficulties she faces in her work.
Mm-hmm.
As horrible as it is, to read about.
Yeah, no, definitely. Can you tell us a little bit about the wolves? It's so funny. There's so much to talk about that this wasn't even a question that I had written down, but they are, so crucial to the book and such a gorgeous and complex part of the book. And so I will ask you to tell us about wolves, but first I'll also tell the audience that if you would like to put questions for Charlotte in the chat, we will get to those later. So this is an invitation to do that for the Q&A portion. But tell us about wolves. What drew you to them? What did you learn?
Yeah, well, so I didn't know a great deal about them initially before I started this book, but I've always loved them and I've always kind of been fascinated by them. And I think that's got to do with growing up reading a whole lot of mythology and fairy tales, and they're very present in that space. But I started to learn about them for this book, and I was just blown away by the incredible power that they have over their environments and how essential they are. Basically, they're a keystone species, which means that they have a trickle-down effect on every other species in their environment. And they literally have the power to regrow forests and change the course of rivers, which is just such a kind of amazing thing. And yet we have such an adverse response to them. It kind of shocks me, the passionate sort of fear and loathing that they generate in people. And I mean, on the other end of the spectrum, they also generate a lot of love. But I think it kind of really, that dichotomy is really interesting and definitely something that I kind of wanted to explore. I mean, Barry Lopez sums it up really well with his, in his nature writing, where he says that we've projected onto the wolf the qualities we most despise and fear in ourselves. Mm-hmm. And so that was something that was really important for me to kind of explore, the idea that we need monsters so that we don't become the monsters. But everything that I kind of learnt about wolves was that they're the opposite of that. They're incredibly kind of gentle and shy creatures that fear humans a lot more than we fear them. They're very pack-oriented, family-oriented. And what was kind of so beautiful was to see how individual their personalities are. They have these extraordinarily distinct kind of lives and adventures of their own that you sort of, you follow, and they become like people or like family. And I really wanted to convey that in the book and to have people sort of really feel for them as characters in themselves.
Yes, I mean, that's so fascinating because Inti mentions that they're not supposed to name the wolves, and so they only call them by number. And yet, like, when I think of them, it's just like number 6 has become number 6's name, and I can see her howling for her mate. And number 10, I can see number 10 and number 14, like they do become characters even without names, which is, just incredible. What you were just speaking about wanting about the us making wolves into the monsters in order to not be them ourselves reminds me of a line that I pulled out of the book too, that's about evil. And maybe we should talk about evil because it certainly exists in this book. So you wrote, "The children in us long for monsters to take forms we understand. They want to fear the wolves because they don't want to fear each other." And in the book, you confront just how evil and damaging people can be to one another. And I'd like to hear a little bit about how you came to include, such pain and violence that are so central to the story and so important to its foundation.
Yeah, I mean, this was obviously the most challenging part of the process for me. And I think where it originally came from, when I first sort of started writing this book or coming up with the book, it kind of came from a place of real anger in me. I was looking at the way that we kind of treat the natural world and wild creatures, specifically wolves, the slaughter of them, which just I can't even kind of really comprehend. And it did feel evil. It feels really, it's unfathomable in a way. But I was also seeing the domestic violence crisis that's happening in the world. In Australia, a woman a week is murdered by her romantic partner, and that's not including all the women who survive their abuse. It's terrible all over the world. This is a global emergency and a massive issue. And so I was feeling really angry about that as well. And I always try to write about the things that make me feel the most, even if it is this kind of negative emotion. So I was trying to I was grappling with how those two things kind of fit together, and it just boiled down for me to a kind of fundamental theme of empathy and a lack of empathy, and what a lack of empathy does to us, turns us into, makes us do, and how kind of crucial it is for us to cultivate empathy in our lives and in the way that we treat each other and the planet. So in exploring all of that, to get to that sort of lighter side, you've got to really go into the darkness. As hard as it can be. And so the book started to become a little bit about, I guess, the divide between violence and tenderness.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I won't spoil anything, but there's a moment near the end that reflects that kind of reflects that empathy from someone that you wouldn't expect it from. That just made me cry. So I just tears, and then I just cried and cried throughout the all the last pages, every page to follow. I found it so moving and so unexpected, and I really do. I feel like it does go to such painful, dark places, and it also restores faith in humanity, which is just such a gift to be given, to be able to see all of it and have it all encapsulated in this book, in these pages. It's so powerful.
Thank you.
So let's talk about Inti, or Inti and Aggie if we want to. So we have twins at the center of this novel, and Inti is our main character. And I've been thinking so much about her since finishing. In some ways, she's very, reserved and self-protective for good reason. And we find out more of that as the book, unfolds. But one thing that I really loved about her was that she wasn't bound at all to societal expectations of women, and she comes into this new place and she has a purpose. And I kept thinking, she isn't there to make friends, she's really there. She's there to do her work, and she doesn't stifle her own rage or her own desire. She has a strong sense of what's right and wrong, and yet she makes decisions that are incredibly complex and morally ambiguous, as you alluded to when you were describing the book to us. And I just found her fascinating. And I guess I've read Migrations. I haven't had the pleasure of reading the books that came before it, but I know that you really see yourself as someone who writes about strong women. And so I wonder, how she fits into your tradition of writing strong women and how she might be different or what might be new about her.
Yeah, so she's definitely, she was a complex woman to kind of grapple with. And I wanted her, I think I write these really kind of fierce women because I would love to be more fierce myself. I'm a bit of a people pleaser, and I am not an angry person, but as I've said, I became really angry about, I'm angry about certain things, that's for sure. And to be able to write Inti as someone who could give voice to that anger in a way that was so she's really defiant, and she really doesn't care what people think of her, or offending people. And offending people is my worst nightmare. So it was so liberating to kind of write someone like that, and to let her be a force for kind of female strength. And it was such a pleasure. And she's a little bit different in that way from a lot of the female characters I've written. I mean, I like them all to be fairly sassy and kind of, sure of themselves, I guess, in a certain way. But Inti in particular was fiercely angry. And that's a scary thing to write for a female character, because we have this tradition of strong, angry women being called unlikable. And I think, that can kind of get into your head a little bit when you start thinking, oh man, everyone's going to hate this woman. But then it was sort of like, well, that's okay if they do, or it's okay if she's unlikable, because she's serving a different purpose here. She's raising issues, and she's defiantly standing up for what she believes in, which are things that I believe in, and I think we need to kind of be defiant about. So I let go of that fear of writing the unlikable woman. I just made her what she was, whatever that may be.
I love that so much. I saw on Instagram that you posted that this is your 10th novel, which is astonishing. And I wonder if, do you feel that the ability to say, to make a decision that says you don't care what other people are going to say about her, like you're going to write the novel that you want to write and this character that you want to write, do you find that you've become more confident the more books that you've written? Or
yeah, definitely, and absolutely. And I've learned so much, over the course of writing all those books. And my early stuff is quite different. It's YA, fantasy, and sci-fi. So, and that it's all, of course, all kind of driven by strong female characters, but they also kind of engage with the world in a slightly different way. And I think as I get older and come to terms with, I guess, the space for women in general and my place in the world, I am getting, I think, a bit more confident about how I want to portray women and what I want to say with them, and letting them kind of be as complex as possible, really.
I'm glad. There's so much room for more characters like Inti. We have our first audience question. Kathy is asking if wolves are being reintroduced to Australia at this time.
No, they're not. We've never had wolves in Australia. So they would be a foreign species and they probably wouldn't help. But we do have dingoes, which are the closest kind of thing. They're our apex predator. And we have the same issue happening here, that their numbers are dwindling, which means that the kangaroo population, which is our kind of native pest. I mean, don't get me wrong, kangaroos are gorgeous, but they are they're running pretty rampant at the moment, and they're eating a lot of the sort of tree shoots. And there's this incredible image you can look at online, which there's a dingo fence which runs all down the kind of length of I think it's New South Wales, and in order to kind of stop the dingoes from going near the farms. But on the side of the farmland, it is just dry, barren dust, And on the side where the dingoes are, it's lush, beautiful green land. And that's because they hunt the kangaroos and the deer that we have here, and they keep things kind of moving. So this is a phenomenon that happens with not just wolves. We can see it in a lot of different environments and ecosystems. And that's kind of why we need this breadth of biodiversity in all our spaces.
I love that moment in the novel. It's such a small moment, but about the woman who has been planting native plants in her backyard and how she sees, just from her garden, the more native species coming and being able to thrive there. That description made me think of that, and it is inspiring sometimes when I feel very, just kind of hopeless about the state of the world, to remember that you can plant, a little vine and some flowers, and that'll, in our area, help the caterpillars come and turn into native butterflies that we don't have anymore. It's
exactly
one small thing we can do, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really important to remember that there are those small things, and not all of these kind of rewilding efforts have to be enormous. We can all do them ourselves, and it not only kind of has an impact on our spaces, but it also has an impact on our emotional state and our own kind of mental health. It's just a really kind of nourishing thing to do.
Yeah. So as I was reading, in the moment that you mentioned when a body turns up, I had this just this jolt of excitement, and I hadn't read the flap copy, which I'm glad. I always like it when I can avoid the flap copy and then go into a book without any spoilers. So I almost sat up and I thought, this is a mystery. It's every other beautiful thing that it is. But it also has so many layers of suspense, because we have our core story, what happened to Inti and Aggie, what turned, Inti's twin sister into this, very traumatized person who sometimes has to seemingly vacate her consciousness and is no longer, able to make sound. And so we have that question, and then we also have this new mystery. This, how did this body? I'm going to try to not spoil it. How, what became of this person? What is the answer? Who should we, suspect, and so forth? And I just absolutely loved. I felt like you had given me this incredible gift that in this novel that I was already totally captivated by, suddenly there was a double mystery. So I was curious, this is a craft question, I guess. Can you tell us a little bit about how you plotted this novel? Was it, because it feels quite intricate to me. I was also curious about whether you always had this structure in mind where we would go and have the very the flashbacks that are very discreet and in their own sections, which I just found so beautiful. So tell us about plot and structure and how you work.
Sure. So I did always know that I wanted to do the two kind of narratives running alongside each other, because I just find that really I find I get really stuck if I just have the one narrative, one point of view, one timeline. I find it just a little bit constricting for me. So I like to be able to move a bit more. And I also really like to be able to go back and kind of learn by seeing these sort of scenes of Inti's past, rather than kind of telling the readers in exposition who she is and where she's come from. I always find it much more kind of viscerally engaging to be able to actually experience all those scenes that have sort of made her into the person that she is. And I also find it allows you to build a lot of tension in terms of okay, this woman was very different in the past. Now she's like this. How did she get from one to the other? And then you kind of build the two timelines alongside each other, and they can kind of generate so much more power, I find, when you line up those climaxes, and you get this really kind of cathartic release of, oh, okay, that's what happened. But it was complex also having the crime in there, because that's something that you know, it's a bit of a challenging thing to kind of know where to plot your sort of clues, and how you want to set up the reveal of information. And I just sort of had lots of little note cards, and put all the kind of elements of the crime on that, and then sort of thought, well, okay, I'll work backwards and figure out where to kind of place these new reveals of information. And then I sort of just let all of that go, and started writing, and kind of let the story lead me through, which I think is also really important, you know, not to get too bogged down in the plotting of something. I was letting Yunti kind of guide me through the story, and in a way it was nice to discover the pieces along with her, because then I could kind of know that would, you know, be satisfying for a reader, because it felt satisfying for me to kind of go, oh yes, it's that thing happened, or yeah. So it was challenging structurally, but it was a lot of fun as well.
Yeah, that's so great. Do you, like, when you make the note cards, I always love the specifics of these things.
Yeah.
So do you like spread them out on a table? Do you pin them to your wall? Is it just kind of like something you flip through? Tell us more.
I glue tacked them all to the wall.
Oh, yes.
So my poor partner had to stare at this montage of horrible crime things on the wall. But yeah, it was good to kind of have it up in front of me, so I could just kind of remind myself, oh yeah, I've still got to put that part in, or that scene doesn't work because I haven't seated in that scene, or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
Is that how you how do you plot your books?
Well, I do use note cards, yeah, which made me very excited when you mentioned it. And sometimes I put them on the walls, and I do a lot of like spreading out on a floor or a big table and moving things around.
Yeah.
I always love that stage. It's like,
it's fun, isn't it?
Yeah, it's so fun. It's like you're doing really important work for the book, but it doesn't feel quite it's like actually writing tons of work does. So it's always a fun time for me.
Yeah, it's a fun puzzle.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. A reminder to the audience that if you have questions, you can type them in the chat, and we would love to hear them. Okay, I'd like to talk a little bit more about theme. Mm-hmm. So I'm sure that most of the people who are watching have read Migrations, because it was such a big success and so beloved. And, you know, because the novels came out back to back, and they both grapple with, you know, issues of extinction and the loss of habitats, and they also both focus on women who are closely observing and tracking natural creatures as they interact with remote environments. I went into Once There Were Wolves with the sense that it might be a companion novel of sorts. Like, I expected them to be more similar than they actually are. They end up being very, very dissimilar. Okay, so my question for you is, how do you go about examining similar themes but from such different angles? And I'll say, like, I find in my own work, whenever, like, I'll have an idea for a new book, and I'll get started and think it's like new and exciting, and then it dawns on me that I'm writing like the exact same book that I just wrote before, and it has all the same themes, and you know, and then I go into fierce self-doubt, and then I have to realize, like, oh no, this is a different thing that I'm building. And I also comfort myself with the knowledge that, you know, authors that I admire so much explore the same themes over and over from different vantage points in their work. And so I just wonder, you know, how that is for you. And also, if you feel like, I mean, these themes seems like you're so passionate about them, and you have so much to say about them, and that they could be explored in so many different ways. So I wonder, do you see yourself continuing to return to them in future work?
Yeah, I went through the exact same thing that you just described, feeling like, oh my God, I'm just writing the same book again. What have I done? um, and then kind of going, it's not. It's very different in a lot of ways, but also it's okay that it is exploring the same thing. It's that I reminded myself of the exact same thing. This is something that a lot of writers do. We get drawn back to these things that we're grappling with and that we feel really passionately about, and that's okay. Maybe every single book I write will be about this in some way, or maybe I'll kind of get over it at some point and realize that I've sort of thrashed it to death. But I think it was, I mean, and it's actually taken me by surprise too, this topic, that because I never initially, before migrations, I didn't really think about, I guess, the natural world or our connection to it, and then it became something that really sort of suddenly just emerged in my life and in myself, and I find myself kind of unable to get away from it in a way. But I think also it's such a good underpinning, this idea of wildness and our connection to wildness, that it allows you to explore so many other things at the same time. This book is kind of, as we've talked about, it's about empathy and violence and healing from trauma, and it's about family and kind of losing trust in people, and all of those things. I was surprised to find that they all kind of could be underpinned by this idea of nature being a healing force, and what happens to us as people when we kind of separate ourselves from that. So yeah, I'm not sure what the answer is. I kind of wanted to keep exploring it and then wanting to sort of avoid it, and it was just a sort of ongoing grappling thing, and I think it will be something that I keep writing about. I know my next book is going to be about an island that's being swallowed up by rising ocean, and what that kind of means for the people on the island, and how we sort of raise children in this dying world, and what our responsibilities are around that. So I guess in a way I've kind of naturally just brought myself back to all those same topics yet again.
And yet it sounds so different, just we're so different from each other.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many elements of this, the enormity of this issue. What we're kind of dealing with now is this existential crisis of our world sort of ending, and so there's going to be really kind of fascinating responses to that and things to explore, and I guess I'll just keep following them.
Well, I have two responses to your answer. One of which is that I will read dozens and dozens of books by you on these themes. I'm glad that I'll be able to continue exploring, these worlds. And then also, I just find it fascinating that, like, you could have written 8 books about completely different things and then have this whole new set of concerns rise up and demand your attention, and then have a third book too come out of this. I think it's very inspiring artistically to think that if we're paying attention and letting in new ideas, that they can be so transformative to our work.
Yeah, that's a really good way of looking at it, actually. It has, I have become a very different writer, and in some ways also I'm the same, like I think I approach my characters in the same way, and I write from the heart every single time and just write the book that I want to read. And it just happens to be that yeah, the world is changing around us, and I think we're kind of changing with it in a way. And yeah, it's interesting when you put it that way.
I'm curious to know just more. I'm just very fascinated by your evolution as a writer, and I'd be curious to know, like, what has it been like to go. So your YA work was published in Australia exclusively, is that right?
Yeah.
And then now you're like worldwide, just incredible success with this new writing for a new audience, and just what has it been like for you? And also the added layer of having this all happen during a global pandemic. So
Yeah.
just what has it all been like?
It's been strange. Obviously I'm not new to publishing, but these two books have been a very different experience than the first 8 or however many there were. And Australia is quite a small industry, so trying to kind of make a living from that is hard. So I sort of thought to myself, all right, if I'm going to write something very different, I may as well try and kind of reach a very different audience. And so I decided to kind of just go straight to America. And I was very lucky to find an agent and then an editor who both have been huge champions of my work. I love them to death. And yeah, it's been very, very different. I think just the level of engagement has been a total shock. But also, in a way, it's kind of similar because, as you say, we're in this pandemic, which means I'm just still living my life at home, trapped in my bedroom. So, there's big differences, and then there's real similarities. I think as a writer, we just kind of come back to the work again and again, don't we? That's the sort of most important thing. And we still live our kind of daily lives and try and, face the challenges of moving between these kind of dark writing spaces and coming back out into our family lives. And the challenges kind of remain the same in a way.
Yeah. Oh, that's fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So Janet has a question, and I'm surprised that I didn't ask it myself. So we'll say, so Inti has a condition called mirror touch synesthesia, and Janet is asking you to tell us more about it and is wondering if it is real or fictionalized.
Yeah, sure. So mirror touch synesthesia is very real. It's a rare neurological condition, which means that whatever physical sensation Inti sees, she will feel it herself. So if she sees someone else getting slapped in the face, she'll feel the sting of that slap on her own cheek. And likewise with pleasure. It's pain and pleasure both, and it's not just people, it's animals as well. So I mean, I was just blown away when I heard about this condition. It's so strange. It's almost magical in a sense. And it just felt like the sort of perfect, it's the ultimate empathy. It's the ultimate connection to other people. And that felt like a really kind of perfect thing for this book about empathy and connection. And I guess the idea that there's danger in that level of empathy as well. That's something that Inti really grapples with. This kind of finding a balance with this condition where she can both survive the vulnerability and also kind of embrace the connection. And that kind of shifts, of course, as she kind of witnesses more harm and along with her sort of view of other people and the ways that she sort of grapples with the trauma as well.
Yeah, it makes me think too, her parents are such fascinating characters. They're so, different from each other. They weren't together for long, right? Like they live very separate lives. And I'm thinking about the moment where the mother cuts her own fingers. knowing that Inti will feel that pain, and how the mother tries so hard to prepare her for this very brutal world that she's going to be going into. How did you form the parents, and how did you think about how they would, treat their daughter knowing about this condition?
Yeah, well, I wanted them to be very different. I wanted them to have kind of polar opposite attitudes to life. Inti's father is this kind of naturalist in the forest of British Columbia, and he's very in touch with his emotions, I guess we would say. He's compassionate and kind, and sort of teaches her about generosity and trust and forgiveness of people. Whereas on the other hand, Inti's got a mother from the other side of the world who is a kind of gritty crime detective, and she has seen the worst of people and kind of witnesses firsthand how harmful people can be to each other. And so I think she's frightened of Inti's condition and the vulnerability that it presents to her daughter. And so she is constantly trying to toughen Inti up and kind of teach her, no, don't trust people. They're going to hurt you. You need to protect yourself at all costs. And so Inti kind of grows up with these two really being pulled in these two very different directions. And I think initially she sort of, I think she's naturally more inclined to her father's way of viewing the world, but throughout the course of her life, as more and more people kind of behave in the ways that her mother warned her they would, she starts to sort of think that, well, actually, Mum was right. I should be closing myself off. But for me, the kind of joy of this book, of getting to the end of this book, is actually the courage that it takes to not see the world that way, and for Inti to kind of recognize that there is so much good in people. There's so much gentle, there's so much tenderness. That's the thing that we need to sort of fuel in ourselves and in each other. And, it does take courage to see the world that way and to be vulnerable to empathy for other people, especially when we don't understand them or agree with them. But that's the kind of most fulfilling and important way to live, I think.
I agree. 100%.
That's so beautiful. I didn't want to say anything else.
I know. I just holding my breath and listening to every word you both were saying. And thank you, Nina, for navigating such a beautiful conversation about, I think, two of our favorite books, right? We both are big fans. I also appreciate that I think it made people more aware of both stories, whether you've read it or not, without giving away too much. And I know that's always kind of hard to do when you've read the book and it's become a part of you, and especially when you're asking the questions, to kind of not give the spoilers, but you did a great job, both of you. And I think for those of you that are watching that have read Migrations, you definitely want Once There Were Wolves. It's just like we've all been saying, it kind of has that, it's very different, although it deals with some of the same themes, but definitely has the same effectiveness and level of engagement, and very special. I think if we could have done 2 first edition club books for the same author year after year, we would have. And really appreciate the talk. I want to also remind those that are watching, whether you're watching live or later, that we do have signed first editions of Once There Were Wolves. And then we also have the paperback edition of Migrations. So feel free to come into either our San Francisco store or Corte Madera store safely, and get it in person. But we are still taking online orders, phone orders, and we really encourage you to take advantage of the signed first editions. And we appreciate you actually doing that. I don't know how that was facilitated especially while you're in lockdown in Australia. But, I mean,
I signed lots and lots of pages, plain pages, and then they got sent back and sewn into the books.
yeah, because we, for most of this year, when we get signed books, we've, been getting book plates, which are fine and wonderful. But when I opened up yours, I was like, oh, wow, this is great. Worth the cost of admission, So once again, thank you. And thank you for our audience for joining. And definitely come to Book Passage or go to bookpassage.com. And Nina, we're looking forward to your next book coming out early next year.
Thank you.
I've read it and it's wonderful.
Ooh. Maybe we'll have you both again, but in different positions.
Ooh, I would love that.
All right. Until our next event, thank you all for joining us.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yes,
it's been lovely. And thank you, Nina. It was such a great chat.
It was my pleasure.